Hello, and it's week 4 in our spring 2013 Introduction to Literature class. We're 25% through the course, if you can believe that, and we've completed a number of assignments. The discussions and the assessments so far for those people who completed them have been excellent, and I appreciate your efforts, especially in the discussions. People have been willing to share their ideas about the different stories, and I've been really enjoying reading people's reactions to one another in their discussions. I do go through it during the week. Every once in a while I'll comment, but I usually try to stay out of the discussions and let them be student generated. But in the past I've jumped in from time to time to put my ideas out there or comment on some of the more insightful ones that I read during the week. Week 2 of this semester was about character. Week 3 was about setting. This week is about theme. And theme is sometimes a little more difficult to kind of wrap our minds around as opposed to characters and setting. The characters are the imagined people, or sometimes they don't necessarily have to be people, but the imagined people in the story. The setting is, of course, the where, the when, and the whether of the story. Theme incorporates both of those, plus some of the other elements that we reviewed in week 1, things like symbol and plot and conflict. Theme uses all of those in an attempt to express something, typically a big idea about life. These stories are written certainly to entertain us and to provide memorable characters and settings, but they're also there at times to express insights about the world around us, about the lives of others, or the lives of ourselves, and that's what theme gets at, that general insight about the world around us. I don't think it's hard necessarily to determine a theme. Common literary themes are things like family, religion, faith, identity, love. But looking at a story and finding those big ideas isn't necessarily difficult. I think when we look at a story like Everyday Use or Two Kinds, those are stories about family. When we look at a story like A.M.P., that's certainly a story about rebellion or even identity. That's not hard to do. I don't think it's necessarily hard to find those big ideas. Where theme gets tricky is determining what the author, through that story, is trying to say about the big idea. What is John Updike in the story A.M.P. trying to say about finding your identity, or sticking up for what you believe in, or rebelling against the authority figures around you? What is Amy Tan in Two Kinds saying about family? For this week, what is Tim O'Brien trying to express about the theme of war in The Things They Carried? Or what is Sherman Alexie trying to express about the world of Indians and Native Americans in What You Pawn, I Will Redeem? Those are the tough questions that theme begs us to answer, and they're the fun questions. Now, when you're coming up with those answers, when you're trying to figure out maybe what the Interlopers is trying to say about land possession or family, you have to look at specific parts. And of course, these parts are things we've already discussed and things we're going to discuss in the future of this course. But to start out, we always look at character action, what the characters do. That tells us and points us in the direction of theme. What Sammy does in A.M.P. points us in the direction of theme. What a character says, their dialogue, the words they say to others, even their inner dialogues, if the story is written from the first person point of view, what they have to say, always important. What others have to say, important. Setting, where and when the story takes place, but also how it's presented to us, what types of descriptions or what kind of words are used to create the setting, and then of course we discussed that setting can be used to embody theme. Symbols, we're going to spend some time next week on symbol, and there's certainly a huge part of a story of the the interpretive aspect of the story, and a symbol can come in the form of an item, a thing, I always look at the wine flask and the interlopers as a symbol of reconciliation, of friendship. Symbol can also come in the form of character action. The way that Sammy quits the AMP is loaded for me with symbolism. When he takes off his apron that has his name tag, takes off his bow tie, folds them nicely, sets them down on the counter that he's been working at for years, presumably, and punches the no sale tab. Kind of loaded with symbolism for him, and when he leaves that store and quits that life. Plot, what happens in the story, and even how it's told in the story. Until Gwen is such an interesting story, and for a number of reasons, the characters and the settings, the way it's told, the second person point of view, but the plot and how it moves through that series of little kind of events is an interesting thing to examine if you're trying to figure out maybe the theme of that story or what the story is trying to say about that big idea in life. Finally, the conflict. What conflicts exist in a story, which internal ones, which external ones, and where do they point us towards those big ideas in life. Now, one thing I think I always think about when I think of theme is this quote I read somewhere, and for some reason it stuck in my mind, and it helps me think about theme. It said that this quote said that theme was the shade that the story casts. Right? What does that mean? I don't know. Why drew this picture? Here we got the sun, we got our tree, and then the shade. For me, the tree here we have is the story, the thing itself that we're reading, the characters and the setting and all those parts of it that make it a great story. The way we look at it certainly would be that sun, how we're applying our own perspective onto that story. And then what's left afterwards, how we think about the world differently because of the story, what it's taught us about those important things in life. That's what theme is. I know it's sometimes conceptual, but it's also a fun thing to examine because we're getting again into the interpretive parts of the story, getting beyond the surface to what's underneath. And it can be interesting. Maybe those are the most powerful things that a story can provide us, powerful connections to ourselves and how we see the world. You have two stories, I think, like I already mentioned for this week. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien and What You Pawn I Will Redeem by Sherman Alexie. The Things They Carried is in the book, the 40 short stories. It's a really famous story about the Vietnam War. Tim O'Brien was a veteran. He served did a couple tours in Vietnam, and came home and transformed his life into a writer. This story, The Things They Carried, is from a larger collection of short stories called The Things They Carried, and it follows all the characters in the story before, during, and after the war. There's a little interview with him on the podcast folder, the website. Feel free to listen to it. I think it's 4 or 5 minutes. It's fascinating stuff. This is a man who's writing about an experience he went through, and some of the things he has to say in that interview about memory and how the powerful, potent memories he has from serving in Vietnam have infected not only his writing life but also his daily life. There's also a really wonderful audio version of The Things They Carried that was produced by this public radio program called Selected Shorts. I'm not sure what time of the week it's on in Portland, on the 90.1 FM, but you can find it online, and they've done maybe a couple hundred shows where they get actors to read stories out loud, and it's I think a 35 or 40 minute recording of the story of the Things They Carried read out loud. It's really wonderful. If you like listening to stories, it's a thing to check out. It's in the podcast folder as well. Good luck this week. If you have any questions, email me. And I know from watching and actually hearing from some students that the audio was off on the last video. I'm trying something different this week. It still could be off. It looks like I got both. I got comments that it looked like a bad Bruce Lee film, bad dubbing in a Bruce Lee film, or something that was being watched in Russia. I don't know. But I hope to fix that in the future, and hopefully it's not too distracting. Good luck this week, and